Hello, everybody. My name's Tom Hart. I am head of portfolio for energy management and EV at British Gas. And I'm going to talk to you today about some of the challenges to EV adoption with a particular emphasis on rural areas and a particular emphasis on home charging and also the role of home energy management in supporting that broader ambition. So what's interesting when you look at rural areas is that when you look at some of the statistics, and you can see here a couple of them, so higher percentage of car ownership, higher percentage of off-street parking, and a higher number of miles per year per vehicle, per person, sorry, you would look at this and think, actually, rural areas are a perfect environment for EV adoption, given all those kind of three elements, and even more so actually that EV adoption with home charging, attached to that, particularly reference to less off-street parking and more private parking areas and driveways for customers to park in and charge their car. So it's strange in some respects that actually the opposite is true, where actually in these rural areas, and it is a degrees of rural, and you'll see the kind of four breakdowns of urban conurbation, urban city and town, rural town and fringe, and then rural village, hamlet or isolated dwelling. And what you're seeing is that actually, the opposite is true. And all these statistics are taken from the National Transport Survey, government survey. And as I said, what you're seeing is that actually the opposite is happening with EV adoption in these rural areas, and that's quite interesting. And I think part of the purpose of this is to maybe generate some conversation about why that might be. But before we go on to rural specific, I thought it was worthwhile just talking about actually some of the universal challenges, because those still need to be overcome across all areas. And I've just picked two that I wanted to talk about. And the one on the left hand side is the actual end-to-end process of it, which could include potentially upgrades to your energy supply and upgrades to your home electrics as a consumer. And the example I've given here actually is my installation. So when I started working EV, I bought my first electric vehicle and decided to get a charge point installed in my home. And what you can see here is the part of the process, I guess, that I went through. So working with my DNO, so my installer, which is myself, British Gas, did the initial load assessment, initial checks on the property, and identified that we need to go to the DNO to ask permission to connect. And once we did that, actually, a few challenges came up, and the ultimate outcome of that was that I needed to have a new supply installed into my home, and that's the picture you can see there on the left hand side of them doing that work. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of disruption to probably more my neighbours than myself, but it was a big piece of work, which for some consumers would be very intimidating, I think. And this is the couple of percent where you have something this extreme. But it is a challenge that goes across all areas where, whether it's something this significant or whether it's just changing a fuse or doing other work that's required by the DNO, and working and engaging with that DNO, that is a real challenge that we need to overcome. And then secondly, within the home, there may be some additional upgrades that are required as well. So that could be anything from, earth bonding, which is actually really important from a safety perspective, to a fuse box change, a consumer unit change, and everything in between. And what we're seeing, when we go out to and inspect these large properties, some of them, they actually haven't been touched or upgraded for a long period of time, and we're actually identifying quite a lot of challenges and issues as we go through. So that is a real challenge we need to overcome, and I'll kind of come on to some of the things we can do about that as well. And then the second one, which is much smaller today, but it's probably worth mentioning, because I'm sure it'll be on people's minds, around local capacity constraints. We'll pick up kind of national kind of capacity constraints a little bit later, but in terms of local capacity constraints, there are some examples we're seeing of this. So we've had a few more rural areas where we've been doing installations where the actual capacity or the size of the main fuse is constrained by the local supply. It's usually overhead lines, particularly in some rural areas, but that is a bit of a challenge today, but it's very unusual. But it's fair to say that challenge will grow. And we are doing some tests and some trials and running some pieces that will effectively try to understand that a little bit better. And there are others doing something similar. But it's relatively small today, but it's growing and will increasingly become an important factor moving forward. So those are universal challenges. And I wanted to raise those because actually it doesn't matter whether you're in any of those kind of four areas that I referenced before, whether it's rural or urban or anything in between, because these challenges and issues, for the most part, can come, no matter where you live. So just trying to raise a few other ideas then in terms of what else could be kind of impacting EV adoption in rural areas and specific to kind of home charging. There will be some, and there's been some studies on this in terms of more socio-economic. So, there's potential that actually the high price of or entry price for EVs is a barrier in rural areas. So that is fairly known and understood, and hopefully as EV car prices come down, hopefully that changes, and we get to start to see some high adoption, or that barrier is removed. But I think there's some other interesting discussion points actually around the fact that there's a lack of public charging facilities. And we know that public charging, although if you've got a home charge point, the majority of your charging is going to be done at home, and probably even less so is going to be done nearby. If you are going to do public charging, it's kind of probably going to be en route, some distance from your home. But I think there's a very powerful element to that in terms of public charging, where if people don't see it and identify it in their locality in terms of where they live, whether that be a village or a town, then that almost perception of I need to have a charging point near me, a local charge point or public charging, is kind of heightened, I guess. I think there's some others as well. So taking too long to charge at home, and some of that is driven by a lot of the more rural you are, the more mileage you're doing. So there's almost a bit of a fear and a misunderstanding about maybe it's going to take too long to charge at home, and I do a lot of mileage every day. And then lastly, what will I do if my home charger stops working? And what's interesting when you look at all of these, part of the reasons I referenced on at the start around why actually EV adoption maybe should be higher in these rural areas, because of all those things I referenced, actually also is part of the challenge, because in more rural areas people are very dependent on their car. So all the natural anxieties or fears, I guess, that consumers have, in urban areas or in more urban areas, are almost heightened in some of these rural areas. So it's not an exclusive list, but I just wanted to put that out there to maybe generate some question and discussion, and see what else people think could be those barriers in those rural areas. So coming on to what can we do about it? And we're looking at a number of things across the board in terms of starting with educating customers. So one of the things that I think we're doing, British Gas are doing, but also I think there's some great things going on across the industry to really educate customers and address some of the challenges I think that I've referenced there, and all the others that we get regarding kind of EV adoption, and that's really, really important. But I think there's an opportunity to go further, and there's lots of examples of this, but I just wanted to kind of give one example of something we recently did in a few weeks ago in conjunction with Ford, who were the charge point installer for Ford UK. And there was an event that we did with them in Fordwich, which is the smallest town in the UK, and quite nicely, obviously, creates a nice play on the word Ford. And there was an opportunity for local residents to test drive the new Mach-E. But importantly, one of the things we did was actually install a charge point in the local pub, which could be used by local residents. And that, I think, although as well as providing a lasting infrastructure for that village, what it also meant is I think there was something symbolic about taking away some of the fear and anxiety that we maybe referenced before, by having that charge point in the home. It becomes more familiar. They see it every day if they're going to that pub. They understand that if they need to charge, they're not able to charge at home, that facility is there for them. And that is really important, I think, to kind of help breaking down some of these challenges in rural areas, even if it's just perception, because perception is as important as reality. So education is key. The other thing that is really dear to my heart is making sure that we have really simple solutions for home charging. And taking those challenges I referenced at the start, our job as an organisation and all installers' jobs is to make that process as simple as possible, and hold customers' hands, particularly when it becomes quite challenging, if there's a lot of additional work that's required at the home. So there's the things you would expect. So the charger is fundamental to that. And we partnered with Alphen to have a really robust charger that we can install into customers' homes. We've got the app, so the ability to control it, which we've now integrated into the Hive app. So the Hive app is used by nearly 2 million customers now for smart home, and now we're able to control your charge point as well when you get an Alphen S-Line installed via us, and all the great features that you can see there on the slide, and that you would expect, and more to come in the future. And then the two crucial elements on the left-hand side, which given what we discussed previously, is massively important for to address some of these kind of concerns universally across kind of all segments. But installation and that end-to-end kind of experience and process, improving that end-to-end, improving that experience for customers, making it simple, holding their hand through that process, keeping them communicating and keeping them updated on what's happening through that process is what is essential to kind of make this as easy as possible for all consumers. And that's something that is really important to us in terms of when we're developing British Gas. And then the 3-year warranty, again, going back to some of those challenges, maybe even greater heightened challenges that we have in more rural areas, that when something goes wrong, customers want reassurance that you'll be there to kind of fix it and resolve it. And we've been very focused on actually ensuring that it's an easy process. So your warranty and any help or any issues is 24/7. You go through in-app chat. So actually within the app, you can go through and chat with an advisor and understand you can share what's going wrong. And then we can also reset that charger for you to enable you to hopefully get it up and running over the phone. And if not, we'll get an engineer out, and with over 175 engineers, we're one of the biggest installers in the country now, and we will we've got great coverage, which is really important when you're trying to get an engineer out as quick as possible to repair what is a vital piece of equipment in the home. So there's just a couple of things to kind of maybe spark some discussion on this particular topic, but I also wanted to talk a little bit around this final piece. And actually EV in many respects is a stepping stone to the energy system of the future, because as we start to take a route towards net zero, what we're increasingly going to have, and we have to a certain degree already, particularly solar PV and battery as an example, we're going to have a whole series of generation and storage devices, whether that be solar and battery, connected hot water cylinders, heat pumps as we decarbonize heat, EV chargers as we've referenced, and in the future potentially vehicle to grid chargers as well. So we're going to have multiple devices in the home, and what we've done is we've connected all those devices up utilizing the Honeycomb platform, which is what underpins Hive, connected all those devices up, and then also connected it with FlexPond. So FlexPond is our flexibility platform, which can help do a number of things. So it can optimize self-consumption in the home, which is really important in the UK, given that the cost of exporting, or what you get back paid for exporting energy, is extremely low. So you want to be optimizing for self-consumption as much as possible, and that can be done even without a battery, actually, even just with solar PV as an example, and an EV charger. But all of this is kind of connected up via those two platforms, and then what that looks like to the customer uses the Hive app, which is a super simple really intuitive, excellent app, as I said, used by 2 million customers now across the country, to help them manage their energy at home. And a lot of that'll be done in the background. So, a lot of the clever stuff will be done in the background, but it gives the ability to kind of manage that end-to-end experience for the customer to, do three things largely: reduce their energy consumption, to reduce their carbon intensity, and reduce the cost. And all of those three, the solution will do is ensure all those three things can be achieved. Obviously, you're going to have tariffs, so in importing energy into the home, so you're going to have an energy tariff as well, and all of that can be managed seamlessly within that kind of one environment. And then lastly, really super important, as I mentioned at the start, we've got our own VPP, which is controlled by FlexPond, and what that does is supports providing flexibility at a national level to balance the grid, but also in the future and in some trials today, we have the ability to support that at a local level as well with the DNOs. So what we have here is really the system of the future, and this can very much be used and built on in retrofit environments when we've got customers where we're adding all these devices over time. But actually, one of the most interesting use cases is new build, and we're starting to see this more and more, where the same challenges I actually referenced at the start are even greater in terms of local capacity constraints, and again, arguably, are even greater in more rural areas, as we build out new homes and as we need to install, everything from EV chargers to heat pumps, all these devices that are consuming large amounts of electricity. Then we need to think differently about how we design that kind of energy system of the future in customers' homes. And we're working very closely with some number of house builders and developers to to utilize this system in some of those homes, and also working with other third parties to create different models, even more future-focused models, and supporting customers and developments in certain specific areas by creating microgrids. So working with a company called Synergy, who's an important partner of ours, we will have the ability to kind of create microgrids where they are controlling the overall site. We are controlling the home, and between us, we can really help to provide a solution which reduces the overall energy consumption of the property and the overall development. So that was a whistle-stop tour, and hopefully that generates some good questions and some good discussion as we come on to next. Thank you very much for listening.